Hello and welcome to another episode of DCU Daily, and we're back with a lot of news today about the Green Lantern show. That's really where things are at. We've got some news about who's the front runner right now for the role of John Stewart. Of course, we already have our cast member playing Hal Jordan. We've got Kyle Chandler on board for that, but now we know that there's an increasingly short or short list for John Stewart. The last time we spoke about it, Aaron Pierre was still in the picture alongside Stephan James. It looks like one of those two is now in the lead, so we're going to get into that. We also have to talk about what exactly went wrong with Joker Folie in terms of just the incredibly bad audience and critics reception, and how it's really struggling to make its money back at the box office. It is a flop at this point. I think it's going to be difficult for it to break even. It's going to be hard. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, look at a little more of the aftermath of what's going on with Joker Folie. We're going to also talk about James Gunn answering more fan questions on threads. Somebody asked him, well, do you take scripts? Like, hypothetically, if somebody wanted to, if one would want to write a story, a script for a movie for the DCU, how would they get it to you? And James Gunn, had an interesting answer for them. So we're going to get into that and so much more today. Of course, joining me today, John is taking a break, so we've got Bridget here. And Bridget, thanks you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Of course. I'm doing good. It's, starting October. I feel like Christmas is in sight. And yeah, just trying to keep it together during the holiday season that is approaching.
Yeah. I mean, and you've been busy, so I'm glad to hear that you have been keeping yourself engaged and doing lots of other projects, and hopefully, there's a lot of movies for you to go see as well, because it's that time of the year where it's not the summertime, but we're getting a lot of Oscar, caliber movies now, and of course, there's a couple of superhero movies still on the calendar, a lot of DC stuff. That's what we're here to talk about today. So, with that in mind, let's get started with our first topic. So, as I mentioned earlier, James Gunn was recently asked by somebody on Threads, as you can see on the screen, how would one go about about submitting a script for a DC project if one was to hypothetically write one? And James Gunn, very kindly basically told them, we don't really take pitches or scripts from anybody. I mean, even established writers, we don't really take scripts from them. We will come up with ideas for what we want in terms of stories that kind of fit into the plan that we have for the world that we're creating, and then we may take pitches from established writers. He sort of broke it down into these layers, right? Like, if I'm going to read this real quick because I think it's very interesting, because it's a very politically, it's a very level-headed. It addresses all the topics. It doesn't put down the question. It also at the same time encourages people to kind of maybe continue. If you have a script and you're passionate and you want to write a story, go ahead and do it. But it's not necessarily something that's going to come across James Gunn's desk unless you already have established background, and James Gunn has an idea that might be a good fit, and then you can kind of pitch that story idea you have that lines up with something they're working on. So James Gunn said this: I get asked this a lot, and I appreciate the passion and the love of the characters, and people should write what they want to write. That said, we don't take scripts about our characters, not even from very established writers. So he's kind of he kind of says there's a big qualifier right there. We usually come up with a general idea that we take pitches from many established writers on, or we occasionally will take a pitch, not a script, from a very established writer on an idea he or she is passionate about, but maybe we didn't necessarily plan on. Of course, there's the little Aquaman emoji at the end, but so he leaves room for interpretation, I suppose. But what are your thoughts on the idea here? Because again, James Gunn is a studio head in Hollywood. The studio heads in Hollywood have hundreds of scripts coming across their desk. They have entire story departments, people whose entire job is to filter out the bad ones from the good ones, provide notes, and then really filter them down to the point where by the time it gets to somebody like a James Gunn, it's the very best of the best of the best. And even then, it's not like they've got an open door policy, or like, there's a mailbox, send your scripts this way. It's very, you have to go through your representation. There's a lot of layers. Exactly. I'm not saying it's gatekeeping, but it's just, you got to think about it. Like, they might be getting millions, not even tens of thousands, but maybe millions of, people, trying to get in touch with ideas that they have. you can't just let everything through. So I mean, Bridget, what are your thoughts on this as somebody who's out
Yeah.
in Hollywood? Uh,
Oh,
where
yeah.
do you come at
Just
this from?
I think that this is, a good thing, a good discussion to have. And it was, I think, an earnest question. And I think it was a great response. It wasn't like, hello, have you heard of this thing called the systemic ladder in Hollywood that you have to climb? He kind of laid it out in a nice way, but said, at the same time, like, be creative, create what you want to create, but don't expect that. I mean, it's hard. I feel like it's kind of like a big dream that a lot of people have, but even something I didn't realize because I always focused on just acting. Exactly. I didn't realize until I got out here and met
Yeah.
other writers that they also have agents for writing. And I was like, wow, that's, having to submit a lot of your work just to get represented in that field. So it's kind of similar. You're always pitching yourself, you're always marketing yourself and your work. And that's the thing. I even was reading like a comment response to this comment, which I thought was, interesting too, because someone said, don't you think more companies should take into account the content of the idea rather than, who's presenting it? Like, why do they have to be established? Um, and I think that's, it's a fair thing to ask as well, because it's like, good content is good content. So why do we have to go through all of these steps? And I think James Gunn replied and said, um, I don't know where the oh, I had a reply, I don't know, but he basically just said, you know, it's more than that. Like the Hollywood executives and the people at the very top, they work really hard, and they already see tons and tons of scripts each week. So if they were just taking like, the same thing with any business, if they just had open calls for everyone in the world to submit auditions or their scripts or this, it would just take forever to get through all the people that want to apply. So it is like a little bit of these checks and balances that I think just is the way that the system is, at least for now. I think the one thing that has kind of changed it a bit is platforms like social media with TikTok and Instagram has kind of been a way for people to present their work, or even people being able to present fan fiction scripts. Like, I remember I couldn't believe that this had happened, but like, I think one of those, I think the first Kissing Booth movie, I don't know if you're aware of that movie, but I think that was based off of a fan fiction from Wattpad. But like, so crazy things can happen if you put it out there.
It can. Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
and I think that's kind of what a lot of people say nowadays is they said, don't wait for someone to give you the permission to do it. Just do it, put it out there. And there's, a lot of different schools of thoughts, because I think things are changing. So I wouldn't let this deter you from thinking, oh, well, I'm not an established writer, therefore no one's ever going to take me seriously. But at the same time, if everyone was kind of, it's not like a lottery. If everyone just was putting in their submissions, then projects would never get done if they had to read through every single script. So I get this. I think this is good to know too, that even established writers at the very top don't write the script. They still have to get James Gunn's permission, and they still have to. All they can do is kind of give little bits of ideas, even though I'm sure they're all very talented as well. It's such a big beast that requires so many people to make a movie like this happen, that it's not as easy as like, oh, we just have one writer doing the whole thing. It's just it's not it's just so much more complex than that.
Sorry, my mic was muted. I was just gonna say it's just funny that we all want to be writing the next big blockbuster. Like, why wouldn't you? It would be so great. Sounds like it would be a lot of
Right.
fun, but it's a lot of hard work, and it takes time to develop your portfolio. Like, you can't just break into Hollywood with just one good script. Can it happen? Yes. It's very rare. It's like you're the 0.001% of the people trying to get through. Um, but like, for example, Tony Reyes in the comments. I love like some of the sarcasm. I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not, Tony, but if you have an idea for a Wonder Twins script, please do send it in. I do believe they can. I mean, and I think he's referencing the fact that there was a Wonder Twins movie that was greenlit at Warner Brothers before David Zaslav and company took over, and then they completely killed it because David Zaslav probably looked at it and was like, They did what? Like what movie? What Wonder Twins? Who are the Wonder Twins? And he just
Right.
probably shook his head at it, and you know what? Like we're gonna
Yeah.
kill that project right quick. Like it's gone.
Yeah.
But also like Caleb is saying making a really good point. I had it up earlier that hey, if studios just started accepting pitches from anybody on out there, they'd be opening themselves up to a lot of potential
Yes,
litigation and legal
that's
trouble
true.
because there's issues even with stuff that has gone through the proper channels. Like there's two big examples I'll mention, right? Two examples, one of which I believe is actively involved in litigation. The other one I think was at some point in the court system. Basically, the first one, actually no, I think they both might be still ongoing because I don't think they were both completely sorted out. But if you remember, the original Top Gun movie was based on like a news article, like a column, and it wasn't really
Uh-huh.
based on a book. It wasn't. It was just on a news column, right? So they
Right.
took that as inspiration and then they turned that into the movie, and so they credit that to the family or the writer at the time 35 30 40 years ago
Right.
got their royalty for the movie and all that stuff, right? Then the sequel comes out and essentially there was a deal in place, and Paramount sort of honored that based on the contract that was in place, but then they got sued that the deal had sort of according to the people suing the state of the person who's now no longer alive who originally wrote that column. They were like that previous deal had expired and so it doesn't apply to this movie, so therefore we demand that Paramount, essentially their goal was to get more money out of Paramount. I don't know
Right.
where that stands right now or if that's still ongoing, but that's like
Yeah.
an example of one where there was a deal in place and even then legal trouble. The problem there was a key issue was the movie, the sequel Top Gun Maverick was being made at a time when the original deal was still active, but because if you remember, the movie got delayed by 3 years because of the pandemic, that kept pushing it back because they wanted to still. Tom Cruise was like, "We need to put this in a theater. You can't just put it out on streaming." It was in that time that the original term of the deal expired. But they were like, the movie was done. It was on the shelf. Like we didn't do anything to make a new movie after the contract had expired, kind of thing. So, or the
Right.
terms of the original deal were applicable. So
Still valid.
there's stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, and then even so do you remember in Rogue One? They had I'm forgetting the name, but somebody in the chat help me out. The general of who was in Rogue One. He was the actor. Okay, Grand Moff Tarkin, right? So it was played by Peter Cushing in the original Star Wars movie, and Peter Cushing had passed away by the time Rogue One came out. But they did like they shot another actor, and then they did a CGI double on his face with Peter Cushing's
Mhm.
likeness, and Disney
Yeah.
had all the contracts in place to pay the state of Peter Cushing, the royalties to and get their permission to do it. But now they're being sued by a company who said that they apparently had signed a deal with Peter Cushing before he passed away for the rights to his likeness, and that
Image.
something that the family themselves weren't aware of. It's like even
Yeah.
when you go through all of those steps, you can land in like legal trouble. So the last thing basically
It's
is the point I'm trying to make is the last thing studios want to do is just start taking in scripts from just about anybody. That being said, you could build up a portfolio, have a couple of like Casey says he's writing many comic scripts,
yeah.
and Tony would like to get a Wonder Twins movie made. I mean, he's probably the only one out there, but
Hey,
if you
never
can
say
establish
never.
yourself as a writer and get out to Hollywood and get yourself representation,
Yeah.
there's the odd chance that you can come up with something genius that James Gunn will take and run with. Because remember, Ana Nogueira just wrote the Supergirl script, which is gonna be shooting starting in January, and she has never written a big feature script before. Certainly not at the scale of a studio tentpole like a Supergirl film, which is gonna have a big $100+ million budget and it's gonna
Right.
be a big summer blockbuster. And now she's working on a Teen Titans script for them. And she was like a stage actress, and as an actress in general, she doesn't have a big resume, and not certainly not as a writer. So it clearly is possible that you can break through still. I mean, the '90s were like the big spec script era when people, the Hollywood studios were buying up spec scripts. Spec scripts are basically where you come up with an original idea, you write it, and then you sell it. It's not based on a book, it's not based on a comic book, it's not like an adaptation, it's an original story. And the 90s were a great time for that. Today, it's less popular that you will get that to happen, but there's also many levels to this game, like you don't have to immediately make a movie with DC Studios. You can start off a little bit smaller and work your way up to that.
Right.
Maybe you get to
Make your own
A24 first,
projects.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of options. I mean, Miraculous in the chat. Hello, Miraculous. You guys are all in the chat. We got the Watcher, we got Casey, Tony, Caleb, Manolo, Buster Barnes, Hunter, Iggy, Jay Kelly. Jay Kelly, he doesn't catch us live very often. We do have a comment from you coming up later in the show, Jay Kelly. So we will get into that as well. And then you guys getting in the chat about other examples. There's also been Caleb mentioning there's also been this huge lawsuit going on against DC Studios and Matt Reeves, been a former Warner Brothers screenwriter from the late 90s, who said Matt Reeves stole his idea for a serial killer Riddler. Again, it's like, the people in Hollywood are suing each other over it. It's like,
right. It's very complicated.
Yeah, it's stuff like that happens all the time. So like, and obviously that's not to say you can't just write a script and get it across James Gunn's desk and he won't read it magically. It could happen. It can happen. There's a reason why there's that little, GIF, not GIF, but this little emoji at the end of that paragraph. And yeah, I mean, that Caleb clarifying that the lawsuit is against Matt Reeves, Warner Brothers Pictures, and DC Comics. And the Watcher saying quality control is important 100%. I'm just referring to talent scouts. Hollywood used to have talent scouts. I think they still do. Unfortunately, you are right that they're not looking to foster new talent, from areas that are underdeveloped. Like, and certainly, like, the representation matters, and there are efforts being made, but it could be better. So I agree with you there. They could do better. It does. There is a little bit of gatekeeping that does happen at a certain point, but I think when you have people like James Gunn in charge, it does open up the door. Ana Nogueira is a great example of that. Like you would not have expected a script from somebody who did not have really any writing credits prior to that to have such a big impact early on in the new DCU. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's staying optimistic, but also being realistic and being aware that this is the way things are. And he even said like in his later response, he said, currently this is the way things are. So things could change, but I'm sure there's always a way to kind of jump over that gate if you can figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah, and Miraculous. Yeah, I mean, they must really like her work. That's why she's not only done one script, now she's working on a second. So yeah, I mean, and she's gonna have potentially two very good credits on her resume from here.
She's not exactly what you might call an established writer, so rules can be broken. That's
yeah. Casey making fun of the Batman. But anyway, so that was James Gunn doing his best to encourage fans to continue writing if they're passionate, and we will say the same. I have written scripts. I mean, I've made a few movies myself, and I'd love to do more of that in the future. If you have those kind of ambitions for yourself, then by all means chase after your dreams. And if you work hard enough and you're good at it, then down the road there's always a chance that you can find that success. It's not ever easy. It always tends to be unfair. Like there always will be people out there who may have more of an unfair advantage, but if you are taking the right things and taking the right steps in terms of telling good stories. The one thing I believe in,
stories
especially
that you
in a world
enjoy.
where like in a world where YouTube exists, if you have the ability to tell a really good story, you can get an audience on YouTube alone and then build a career off of that. Like there's been countless examples of people who have started out on a platform like YouTube and then have gone on to have bigger careers. And so there's every possibility that all of us in the chat watching right now, or any of us here on screen, could have a shot at getting to that level down the road. I mean, James Gunn 20 years ago, you would not have bet that he would be where he is today. So he's really worked his way up to that level. So it's all possible.
Exactly.
I've got a bit of a sore throat. Sorry about that, guys. But
no worries.
gotta clear up the phlegm. But let's keep the ball rolling here. So John and I have been following this next story for the better part of like 3 months since the original tracking numbers came out. Long-term tracking was over 100 million, then it dropped to 70 million. Last Friday it was 45 to 50 million. We now know that Joker Folie Deux debuted to like 37 or 37.8 million, I think it was, or 38.7. It was basically not even 40 million. and a fraction of the budget of $200 million that it was made for, and it was less than half of what the first movie debuted at. Not to mention, the cinema score is the lowest cinema score of any comic book movie in history. It has also
I
got
know.
a very putrid audience reaction, popcorn meter score as they call it now on Rotten
Right.
Tomatoes. So we've been talking about it, and I wanted to kind of today not just kind of repeat what we already discussed in the last few episodes. I wanted to kind of get a little deeper into what went wrong with this, very star-studded movie, both in front of and behind the camera. And I came across this article, or not this article, it was just like this infographic from Culture Crave, and they sort of like lay out the timeline for this movie in terms of, from when it was originally conceived, the story idea, and all the way to, where things stand today with how the movie's performing at the box office and with the audiences. So there's a 14-step, not plan, but basically breakdown of events. So let's go through that really quickly, and then we can talk about it. So
Yeah.
it looks like, unlike what a lot of people might have thought, is like, hey, Warner Brothers went back to Todd Phillips and were like, you need to do a sequel. It seems like even if that was the case, the idea for this movie was something that came from Joaquin Phoenix in terms of what the story was going to be, supposedly in a dream. I mean, go figure. And then
Very
Joaquin
true.
Phoenix
Yes.
contemplated. He thought about putting on a Broadway show for this before committing to make a movie. Now, I don't
Yeah.
know if that means he wanted to do a Broadway show based on the movie, or if he wanted to do like a different Broadway show and he just wasn't into the idea of doing movies, or like maybe taking a break from doing movies and just going on Broadway for a while. Like a lot of actors do that.
Right.
But it seems like there were a couple of different options on the table for him early on, but then Warner Brothers were like, Todd Phillips, you got Kate Blanchett with the budget, as in 22 Jump Street, or just free reign, as it says on this graphic, to do
Right.
whatever the heck you like. Do your thing, do his thing, and
Yeah.
they didn't even have any test screenings, right? So no test screenings, so you're not getting any audience feedback. So it's
Yeah.
really, you're trusting Todd Phillips to deliver something that's going to work for. Clearly, the first one worked for $1 billion worth of audiences showing up to the movie theaters. So like maybe Warner Brothers thought that Todd Phillips really knew what he was
What
doing.
he
He's
was
also done the
doing.
Hangover movies. So yeah, but
Right.
but then of course Lady Gaga signs on, and she signed on before the script was even finished, which is a surprise to me. That one surprised me because I wasn't uh, sh- thinking that she would have signed on that early in the project, but it seems like that was the case. So there
Right.
we are. So now you've got, three really, really big names attached to the project so early on. You don't even have a finished script yet. Um, and then the new James, boss of DC Studios, James Gunn, who we've been talking about all this time already on the show, he had basically zero involvement on this because a lot of this project, especially the early development on this, took place before James Gunn even came into the play at DC Studios. DC Studios didn't exist. So he gave some notes to Todd Phillips, but Todd Phillips decided not to use them. And when Warner Brothers gave him free reign, this wasn't a DC Studios film. This was a Warner Brothers film. So, sister studios, but, ultimately James Gunn couldn't mandate, Todd Phillips to do what he wanted to take his notes and implement them. He just gave him notes like, and use them or don't. And Todd Phillips did it.
Right.
So maybe to the detriment of the movie or the box office results at the end of the day, but he decided not to. And then the film's budget was 200 million, as I mentioned, including. And yesterday I was going over this. Like they had a $20 million salary for Joaquin Phoenix. And if I remember correctly, Todd Phillips took home a similar amount, and then Lady Gaga also got 12 million. So right there, between the three of them, that was almost the budget of the first movie entirely. And then of course they still have
Yeah.
to put money into actually making the film. Um,
Right.
so far, like just off the first six pieces here, what surprises you the most? What sticks out to you the most? And what are you most intrigued by? Like, where do you think? Did you think any of these first six elements are where things went wrong, or do you feel like this was still they could have made a great movie at this point in the project?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think like even the idea coming to him in a dream, I actually think that's great. I'm like sometimes it's where I feel like I've had that before too. It's like you wake up one day, you have like this thought in your subconscious, and it like changes. You're like, oh, that's like what I need to do with my life, or that's what I need to. So I think it can be really informative. Um, but I do think, especially seeing Step Six having such a huge budget, already giving all these payouts, they definitely were thinking this was going to be a great success, is what that makes me think. But it's really interesting to me that they decided not to have any test screenings. I feel like that is crazy. That is like, I feel like no matter what, you should always do that just to give you some direction and let you know where you're hitting. Because I've heard of that before too, where movies will go all the way to test screenings, and if they do so badly, they won't release the film at all.
I mean,
So,
they've reshot the latest Captain America movie, supposedly almost the whole thing was reshot because the test screenings are so terrible. And we know that the two Aquaman movies both went through a lot of test screenings and a lot of changes. Black Adam supposedly had test screenings and they did reshoots. So it's very common in superhero movies of this size
right,
and scale. Like you've got so much
and-
money on the line, you know? But
right,
yeah.
it's such a big investment that it seems so risky to just not have any of that throughout the whole process, and just to be like, okay, here it is, we finished it. And then I think it's even harder, because especially if they think it's going to do well because they haven't had any feedback like that, then I think it's even more of a shocker for them. But thinking about the Broadway show, I could be wrong, but I wonder if he was thinking of maybe in his dream it was like the Joker singing these songs, and that's just kind of what I thought before hearing all this too, is that
Right.
it was going to be like a part of his character and like his
Right.
fantasies coming to life. And maybe he thought, in the way like a lot of Broadway hits then become movies after, like Les Mis and Lion King and all that.
It's
And what
I mean it definitely had the feel for it. Like if you watch the movie or if you even watch the trailers, it feels like it's almost like a stage play come to life on screen.
I
It's very
mean,
surreal.
maybe.
You know?
Yeah, I almost wonder if it might have had more success if that's like what he was maybe he was thinking, "Oh, let's put it on Broadway. It'll be this cool new medium for the Joker now in a musical form. And if we have a lot of success with that, we could make a movie version of it." Maybe I feel like that might have been his thinking. And I wonder if the studio said, "Well, let's just cut to the chase and make a movie." That's what that's what my brain was thinking could have happened. Um, because that's kind of like typical for Broadway musicals to get a movie adaptation, and it's very different. But I feel like for a lot of people, it's like, well, they love the musical itself so much, the original musical on Broadway, that it fits as a movie. Whereas I feel like if you just had some of these things just be the movie, I think people would be like, why is there all the singing? That's weird. Because for people that don't go to musicals a lot, I think it's kind of it's a different, I think you have to know it as a musical first to be on board.
I mean there's examples out there of movies that have been musicals that, came like, for what was the one? The with
Like
Ryan
Mamma Mia,
Gosling. Well, Mamma Mia, there was I was the
La
one
La
with Ryan Gosling
Land.
and Emma Stone, La La Land, right? Like it just you
You're
can
right.
make it
You're
a
right.
musical. I mean, granted that it could work. It doesn't need to be something that is based like Wicked, for example, is based on a musical becoming a
Right.
movie. I just think that early on the idea, the way they developed it, and the fact that they were sort of in their own bubble and did not get um a lot of
What they were really putting
a
together.
lot of feedback. Yeah, I mean, I think the lack of test screenings and not taking James Gunn's notes are two signs,
Those
that
are big
of
things.
yeah, I'm like there's something that maybe they should have done differently. Now, of
Yeah.
course, there's a lot more to this here. We only did the first 6 points. So the musical aspect was largely downplayed in marketing, with director Todd Phillips at first insisting it wasn't one. It clearly is a musical. I
I
mean, it as much as it wants to deny that it isn't. It is on a fundamental genre level a musical. And then
and I
Christopher
think
Nolan
that's the
reportedly
worst.
changed the yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's because I think it's the worst thing you can do is say, "This is not a musical," when it clearly is. It's gonna piss people off, especially people that don't like musicals or think that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's also superhero genre, so it's not very expected.
yeah, yeah. That's fair. Um, and then number 8, Christopher Nolan, which Caleb was talking about it, like, there's why he feels like it's so dumb that Christopher Nolan was involved. But look, Christopher Nolan apparently, according to this graphic, was reportedly involved in changing the ending of the first movie because it ended with Phoenix's Joker carving a smile. So there was no, and he didn't want that to be the case, like, because basically in the first movie, he would have carved a smile on his face, kind of like the Heath Ledger Joker. He doesn't really do it in the movie, but his character is known for that, the one from The Dark Knight. So there wasn't any resistance for that in the sequel because Nolan is no longer at Warner Brothers. He's of course at Universal, and we see that happening at a point in the movie. So it's really drawn the ire of a lot of people because they're like, why? But I guess they almost did it in the first movie, and didn't have any resistance this time around. It's been misreported that Christopher Nolan had that influence on the Joker Folie too, but in actuality, it was for the first movie where he didn't allow that to happen, which is fine. Christopher
Right.
Nolan is one of the biggest directors in Hollywood. He's a crown in the he's a jewel in any crown jewel, I should say, for any studio. Right now it's at Universal. Warner Brothers would love to have him back. So if he was back at Warner Brothers, they would totally listen to him and be like, yes, we're not doing that, like they did the first time
Right.
around. So, but that is one thing that a lot of fans did not like about the sequel. So maybe they shouldn't have done it, because them not doing it in the first movie, people were okay with that.
It
It
paid
made a
off.
lot more
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
Now, the other point that's interesting is Todd Phillips was secluded on a ranch during the opening weekend. So I mean, that's fine, whatever. Like, he didn't want to be, part of all the blowback or the feedback, because
Hubbub.
when a
Yeah.
movie comes out, when it's great, it's great. When it's bad, it's bad. And
It's
filmmakers, we've
hard.
seen so many examples in recent years where they react very, very badly sometimes to the feedback from the
Yeah.
audiences. They kind of lash
Want
out
their
at people.
comments. Yes.
It's the comments. So I'm like, it's fine. Todd Phillips, and plus Todd Phillips has said he's kind of done with the franchise anyway. He might have just come back for the money to a certain degree. And he's got his
Mhm.
paycheck. He's made a movie. He's made a movie that he's clearly proud of, and that's that. And that's okay. As a storyteller, that's the best you can do. But then
Yeah.
number 10, film was panned by fans and critics. 33% Rotten Tomato score, 31% audience score. We were just talking about that and looking at it. It's just both of those numbers are really bad for a movie of this scale. It's like it's Morbius
Yeah.
levels bad. It's like so
Ooh. Which is
disappointing. And I
crazy.
think
I did not
yeah.
expect that.
I mean, the audience score is even lower than that. It's the lowest audience score that I've seen in a long time for any superhero
Mm.
movie. Even the bad ones usually get a better audience rating. So, and the cinema score was a D, which is the lowest ever for a comic book film. I mean, are you surprised by that? That's one thing I wasn't expecting, that it would be that low. Like
I know.
I figured there'd be more fans of the movie.
I honestly think the biggest thing is them not really saying it was a musical. Like, when I remember even people at work actually saying like, "Oh, we're gonna go see Joker when it comes out." I knew people that were really excited, but I was like, I remember saying like, "Yeah, and it's gonna be a musical, like a jukebox musical," and they were like, "What? It is?" And I even told my brother, and he seems really surprised. So I think, and if you read a lot of the comments, a lot of people are like, this was a musical. Someone said they're like, they need to have a trigger warning that it's a musical, because I didn't know. And I was very disappointed. I ended up walking out of the theater. And
Yeah.
that's such a shame. But I do feel like that's really a big a factor on the score.
Yeah, there's definitely a few scenes in this movie that I think really put off a lot of people. I agree with you. J. Kelly Nolan is a goat. Um, Lucario, we haven't seen Lucario in the chat in a long time. Lucario Trainer, hello, hello, hello in the chat. Miraculous saying, nope, I'm not gonna say that out loud. Oh, Miraculous. You said the Variety article also mentioned Bradley Cooper's absence on Joker sequel as a producer might have been a negative impact because he has good commercial sense. That is true. Bradley Cooper was a part of the first movie, like as a producer. He wasn't in the movie, but he was behind the scenes. And Bradley Cooper isn't just a good actor; he's got really good business sense. So I know that the first movie was almost like an indie movie that happened to be, partly funded by Warner Brothers. This movie was definitely had the whole might of the studio behind it. So I think the behind the scenes, the way it was handled was very different. It was more like a traditional Warner Brothers blockbuster, like the DCEU movies. So that's really where maybe Bradley wasn't as closely involved.
Yeah.
And the Watcher saying, I'm honestly tired of realism in the comic book movie space. Period. Honestly, it's been done 1,000 times already. Give it a rest for a while. high fantastical, make it like the comics. I mean, hey, that's probably what James Gunn's gonna give us, and I don't mind it. And like Jay Kelly said, the audiences gave a good score to the first movie. They did, and I think the first movie, in comparison to this one, was much more digestible. Like, there's a reason why it made $1 billion. People went to see it many times. This movie, it's hard to
Yeah.
watch it once, no less, twice, 3 times, or 4 times, or bring somebody else with you. It's really not the kind of movie that you're like, oh my god, it was amazing. Why don't you come and see it with me? Like, it's hard. It doesn't have that quality, unfortunately,
Right.
which is fine. Movies can be like that, but it's just not gonna lend itself very well to being commercially successful when it's like when a movie you can go see multiple times. That's how all those Marvel movies make $1 billion. That's how the Dark Knight trilogy made $1 billion twice, because you could watch those movies over and over again and have fun. This movie is it's a hard watch for many reasons. Or it's got very mature material. It's a hard R, and not hard R in the Deadpool kind of way. There's a lot less humor and a lot more violence and sexual violence and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's not an easy one to digest. That being said, here are the results. Domestically, it opened up to 37.8 million, lower than comic book films like the Morbius and the Marvels.
Oh
Morbius
my
and the
gosh, the
Marvels opened
Marvels.
to.
Oh, that's
I enjoyed
so
the Marvels.
sad.
It wasn't the best thing ever. I enjoyed the Marvels. It was sort of mid for Marvel standards. But still, I mean, Morbius and Marvels are both looked at as flops, like especially Morbius. And for
Right.
this to open up below those numbers, that's mind blowing to me. That's just insane.
Right. Because
And with the budget,
in my mind,
sorry,
it was just gonna do so much. No, it was good. Yeah, because I think in
yeah,
my mind,
oh, gonna do so much
it's
better.
I think it's just so confusing, and but I think a lot of it is like you said. Actually, the first one having that kind of indie feel. Now it feels like it's a big studio production. I think it's hard because I think people fell in love that they were like, "Oh wow, this was like amazing," and it felt so gritty and alive. But it's just I think was so
Yeah.
different for the second one. It's like you find your favorite flavor of ice cream, but when you go back for a second taste, it tastes completely different than you remembered. It's then you hate the flavor.
Yeah, it's also like Nelson's asking, is it that bad? I'm like, look, you can watch it and have your own opinion on it. I think everybody is gonna come away from it with
I mean,
with a different
some people did like
perspective.
it. Some people,
Yeah, I mean, John liked it. John watched it. He was like, you know what? I like it. I like the commentary that it has on society and how
yeah,
people, with mental illnesses get taken advantage of by society for many different
yeah,
reasons.
right,
Um, but like Lucario Trainer said, he said he liked certain portions of the movie, but overall not a good movie. That's a lot of what seems to be the consensus amongst the majority of the fans out there. They
yeah,
just walked away with a sour taste in their mouth, but they said there were certain parts of the movies they liked, but overall it's not something they would want to watch over and over again. And again, that's really where
yeah.
it's going to
I
have
think that's
struggles
fair.
financially. It's
Yeah,
it's going to need to make $450 million globally to break even because of the budget and of course the marketing money that they've put into it.
right.
So with the current trajectory, it might lose like $150 million for Warner Brothers, who are Warner Brothers Discovery is already well into debt, $40 billion worth. A lot of that
Yeah,
comes from the AT&T era, and so it's not Discovery's fault, but they cannot afford money losers like this. Of course, we thought that with the DCEU done, a lot of that was behind them because those DCEU
right.
movies like the Flash and Blue Beetle and what was the Black Adam, like they all lost so much money. Like the Flash might have lost them even more than $150 million. So
Yeah,
we thought that wasn't gonna be the
yeah,
case with this movie, especially when the first one made $1 billion. But
totally. It's
it's just
incredible.
you
It's
know
just even knowing,
yeah.
like I knew a lot of people excited to see this, and like when the Marvels came out, like you said, like I don't think I knew anyone that was really going to see that. So this, I mean, this is really shocking numbers to see. The word clearly got out, and people were probably to all their friends and family saying, don't go see it." Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on mute. You can tell me.
Okay,
What I
I'm
was saying,
sorry.
you can absolutely tell me. I mean, like, people can't hear me
Oh, duh.
talking, so.
I was like,
But
you're
I was
on
just gonna
mute.
say, yes, these are all the reasons for why the movie flopped. You know, from the making of the movie to how the audiences reacted to it, and how it made maybe, very little money. And very little money is actually a relative term. It's made 121 million dollars, which is enough to, I would say, make it a good opening weekend worldwide. But it's certainly well below par. Like the original movie, the first Joker made like 200 million worldwide. 100 million almost
Yeah,
domestically alone. So it's gonna struggle. It's not
yeah.
gonna get to 450, and it might be one of the biggest flops in comic book movie history.
Yeah.
Morbius
Or at least
level.
one of the
Wow,
biggest
that's hard to imagine. Yeah,
disappointments for sure. Even I remember
yeah,
looking at the billboards that they have here in LA last week, and I was like, oh my gosh, it looks so good. So I think it's really unfortunate.
yeah, yeah. Well, let us know if you guys saw the movie. I mean, are you
Yeah.
guys any more excited or any less excited to go see the movie? We've been talking about it for the last several days as if, like, this movie has completely crashed and burned, because it has, but that doesn't mean you can't go and enjoy it. Maybe you'll have a good time with it. That, like, John enjoyed it. I would say Lady Gaga did a good job with the character that she, was meant to play. Is it going to be the definitive iteration of Harley Quinn for a lot of people? No. But if watch the for what it is, you may enjoy what she has to offer. So I'll leave it at that. Now, with that said, of course, let's talk about Green Lantern. Let's turn the page and let's go. Let's get into the light a little bit from the dark.
Yes.
And
Some
there's
hope.
been news, some hope, some hope. There's been some news recently today, actually, from the Insider. I've got the Hollywood Reporter article up here because the last time we touched upon this, September 27th, so it's been a couple of weeks, where there was a news report in the Hollywood Reporter. Aaron Pierre and Stephan James were in the mix to play Jon Stewart for the DC Studios series Lanterns. It's an HBO original series from DC Studios. We know Kyle Chandler has already been cast as Hal Jordan. We now need to figure out who's going to play Jon Stewart, the other Green Lantern, and was going to be like a buddy cop mystery, detective mystery, sort of like a True Detective-esque show set in the DC universe. So of the two, a lot of people want Aaron Pierre because they feel like he would be the perfect Green Lantern for this. But to kind of think about it from a perspective of who will pair up well with Kyle Chandler as the Hal Jordan, I mean, it depends on how big of an age difference you want to show, because I feel like Aaron Pierre tends to look older than Stephan James. You've got them right next to each other here, and I could tell you that for me at least, Aaron Pierre looks like he would feel like an older version of the character than Stephan James. With that said,
Yes.
though, today we got a report that from the Insider, because this is the news report from a couple of weeks ago. But the Insider is like a newsletter. You guys might have already heard about it. If you subscribe to it, you might have already read this. But Stephan James is now reportedly the front runner for the role of Jon Stewart in Lanterns.
Yeah.
So James Gunn, Chris Mundy, who's the showrunner, Damon Lindelof, and Tom King, who are all executive producers, they're all leaning towards Stephan James for the Lantern series. There's no offer has been made, but it looks like he's edged ahead. What are your thoughts on this, Bridget? Because I don't know if you've really talked about this before on the show, at least not you and I. So I want to know what you think about Stephan James potentially playing, our new Green Lantern as Jon Stewart. Not the Hal Jordan one, but the Jon Stewart, who's like a younger Lantern, but maybe he's,
Right.
taking on the mantle from Kyle Chandler's Hal Jordan. So what do you think about him? Would he be a good fit for the role? And do you think he'd be better than Aaron Pierre, who was the other front runner, or, in the short list before we got to this point?
Yeah, that's true. It's hard. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not super familiar with the work that he's done. So I feel like I can't be like, oh well, I'm not necessarily like really rooting for one over the other, but I do feel like I could see that. He definitely is younger looking, so I think that could be a big influence as to why they want him in this role. Just to play with that dynamic against like Kyle Chandler as well as he's kind of leading him through the ropes in this show. But at the same time, I do think, I mean, and they've got like they've got different vibes as well, him and Aaron. Part of me kind of feel like Aaron could be a great casting as well, just because of his eyes. You know, I feel like in the comics he's got like the green eyes. So I feel like that is kind of like true to the character a little bit. But you know, to be honest, I feel like I I don't know. I can't say like one is clearly better than the other. I feel like they both probably have pros and cons that they can bring to the character as far as their look and their age and you know the projects they've been in. I
Yeah.
mean I feel like Aaron would do great at this, but I don't know much of Steven's work, so I can't say anyone else would do fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen him in a couple of things. I've never, not enjoyed anything that he's been a part of. Um, miraculous in the chat getting on with Nelson about how Nelson wants a Joker 3. I mean, it'd be hard to do a Joker 3 without, certain characters being there. But anyway, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
spoil that for Bridget. But
Go ahead and
Green
write it
Lantern,
for us.
yeah, Green Lantern, Stephan James. He doesn't have a huge resume, but so so it's also true for Aaron Pierre, who's got that movie Rebel Rage on Netflix right now. He's done a few other things. He was in that Krypton TV series. We can, if you guys want, we can do a quick IMDb and let's go through his credentials here
Yes,
for
some other
Stephan
credits.
James, because I think it would be interesting to find out what he's been a part of. I've seen him in a few projects before, but I don't think anything really particularly rings a bell in terms of like a really iconic project. Like he hasn't really done a ton. He's still, pretty young. He was in Selma. He was in Race. If Beale Street Could Talk. A couple of
Yeah,
roles where he's in,
yeah.
supporting capacity. 21 Bridges, the one with Chadwick Boseman. Um, he was in that show Babes. He was in Surface. Delia's Gone, National Champions. Homecoming. Homecoming is the one that I remember him from because he was in, I believe it was, yeah, it was both seasons, I think. Or actually, no, he was in season two. He was in season two of Homecoming. I really enjoyed his role there. He played like one of the former army, infantrymen who was at this facility recuperating. And the story of Homecoming is kind of fun. Like if you haven't seen Homecoming, it's on Amazon Prime. Go check it out. That's where I remember as Stephan James from. But he's done a few movies. He's done a few TV shows. Nothing that's iconic. Is not like a big franchise person, as you can tell. None of these things are huge franchises or IPs. But if you look at his resume, do you feel like that kind of puts him in a good spot to take on a role? He's not when he steps into the role of John Stewart, people won't necessarily think of him as like, oh, that's Stephan James. Like if
Yeah,
Matthew McConaughey became Hal
exactly.
Jordan, they would say, oh, that's Matthew McConaughey. Like no, it's
Yes.
gonna be easier to maybe see him as John Stewart and
Start
not
fresh.
necessarily him.
I think you're right.
Exactly.
It's not. It's like the opposite of stunt casting, but I think it's great to really make the character feel fresh and new to the audience. And then this is like okay, and I think it's smart. Usually, what they do when they have a bunch of supporting, it's like okay, they're probably ready to take on a lead now and kind of bring their own into this project. So I think it makes sense that he's a big front runner in this. It gives you a lot more potential to see what you could do with that character.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And Miraculous kind of asking the question that I sort of asked myself too: is this more or less a speculation? I mean, I will say this: Jeff Snyder does a pretty good job as far as like getting the inside word on these projects. I don't think he has 100% track record, but he's generally more right than he is wrong. So I would say
Okay.
him mentioning this is probably closer to the truth than anything. Of course, nothing is decided. They can still change their mind. Contract talks could break down. There's a lot of things that can happen. As far as like screen testing goes, we have no idea. I mean, there's that stuff is so buried behind all the NDAs that everybody probably signs. We're not going to really know what that process is going to look like or has been like until well after the fact when the NDAs expire and they can talk about this. Josh Brolin
Yeah.
was like, didn't work out. It seemed like he was hinting at maybe that contract talks didn't work out or scheduling didn't work out. That's why he didn't end up playing Hal Jordan and we got Kyle Chandler instead. Something like that could
Yeah.
happen with Stephan James as well. Now, Stephan James isn't exactly Josh Brolin. He's not exactly an A-lister who's, got movies lined up left and right, but he is a talented actor. He's done a lot of good stuff already. So even though it's not the highest
Yeah.
profile stuff. I think this would be the biggest role of his career, kind of like for Kyle Chandler playing Hal Jordan is probably the biggest role of his career. And I don't mind that. Like it gives them a place to grow on television in the Lanterns TV
Yeah.
series, and then eventually they can transition to movies and to continue on with playing the roles because these characters will be the same ones that we get in the movies. It's all part of the big DCU, and I'm excited for that. I
Right.
mean, whether it is Stephen
Yeah.
James or whether it is Aaron Pierre, I for one think they can't go wrong. They've got two really good candidates at this point, and one of them
Yeah.
was going to eventually come out on top. If it's Stephen James, then so be it. And Jay Kelly saying Snyder is definitely a good follow. Yes, he is. His newsletter is very insightful. That's why he calls it the In Snyder. So if you guys haven't already, then go check it out. But that was the news on the Green Lantern front. And speaking of
Yeah.
Green Lanterns, we do have two comments I wanted to go over, which kind of line up with this story today. So I figured it would be a good time to talk through these. So the first comment we got, and this is how we usually end the show. So we're bringing these back. We haven't been really doing these for a while, but here we go. Um, the first comment is from Jay Kells, who I believe is in the chat. So thank you, Jay Kells, for stopping in live today. You mentioned this on yesterday's show that post-crisis for comic book readers and Justice League Unlimited for no comic book readers. Justice League Unlimited was an animated TV series. Post-crisis was sort of like an era of DC Comics back a couple of decades ago, in the 2000s essentially, since the turn of the century. So for post-crisis for comic book readers and Justice League Unlimited for no comic readers have an audience of fans that have been waiting for something from DC Warner Brothers on the big screens since. Yeah, absolutely. We have all wanted Green Lantern stuff on the big screen. Even though I love Man of Steel, most general audience fans of DC characters couldn't relate to it because it was an unfamiliar version of Superman. Yeah, that's true. He wasn't exactly the iconic version of Superman that most people were expecting.
Right.
It's also why the Green Lantern movie failed because most of the general audience's Green Lantern was and is John Stewart. Now, remember the Green Lantern movie that Ryan Reynolds was in 2011 was as Hal Jordan, which is a version of the character that hasn't been like the primary Lantern in the most recent iterations, whether it's in the comics
Right.
post Crisis or for the Justice League Unlimited animated series, which I grew up watching. And so I always was like, oh yeah, John Stewart's my Green Lantern. They have had Hal
Yeah.
Jordan in animated DC movies, but it's not been something that has had as
He's
much
not
of a
like
cultural zeitgeist,
right.
presence.
Right.
So I totally get it. I mean, do you think that I think it makes sense that John Stewart would be most people's Lantern, and that they probably made a mistake by having a Hal Jordan Green Lantern movie in 2011. I mean, what are your thoughts? Did you like that Ryan Reynolds movie, or have you been waiting for a John Stewart Green Lantern
I
too?
mean, to me, unfortunately, I wasn't the biggest Superman before. So to me, I was like, okay, this is my first introduction to the Green Lantern was Ryan Reynolds. This is so embarrassing, I know, but I guess yeah, I know it didn't do great, but I think learning this context of oh well, look at big factors that it in a lot of people's eyes, it was the Jon Stewart version. I think that's for a lot of things happens when you see your this beloved character that you grew up watching, that you fell in love with, depicted in a different way. It can just be it can be unsatisfying, and it can also sometimes feel like a snub to the character that you love. So I think it's hard. I think it was always safer to go with what people know.
Yeah.
At least for the very initial introduction, and they can grow as a character and change, but you have to make the audience like them. And if already people feel distance from them, it's gonna, I think, make it just a harder hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, for example, the most recent version of the Flash that we kept on seeing is Barry Allen, and
Yeah.
the one in the comic books that's been more popular in recent years, and the one that we have been seeing in a lot of the animated TV series in the past, like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, was Wally West, and
Mhm.
a lot of the stories that they adapted for the Flash TV show on the CW were essentially Wally West stories that they adapted for Barry Allen. So there's examples of this across DC, with characters like the Flash and Green Lantern, where you've got multiple iterations, and certain iterations are more popular with certain generations. And I think the people who have grown up over the last couple of decades with the character of Green Lantern, the more popular one has been, the John Stewart iteration. And yeah, so it would make sense that hopefully that's the direction they're going in. I think they recognize that because they're getting a more, what they're calling a more veteran, grizzled, legend of the Green Lantern Corps and Hal Jordan
Right.
in this new Lantern series, and then the
Yeah.
John Stewart character is going to be the
It's gonna
young up and coming and
right,
take the
exactly.
mantle. So
And
I
I
like
think
that.
that's
I think James Gunn is
me
aware
too.
of this.
I think if
Yeah.
anything, it kind of bridges. They're not even like ignoring what they did before and being like, we're just going to put in John Stewart, forget Hal Jordan. They're saying, how can we create that passing of the baton and now introduce this new chapter? And I think that just gives a lot of closure too. I think it's nice to kind of make it make sense for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but Lenny asking about Superman and if it's flops, will the DCU be doomed essentially? I don't think so. I mean, they got to stick with it for at least a few years with a couple of movies. You don't just, walk away if one movie does terribly, especially not after all the
Right.
groundwork they've laid. And I don't think it's going to flop. But if it
Exactly.
did, it'd be worrisome, yes, but they've already got so many other projects on the books that I wouldn't imagine they're going to just pivot away straight like right from the beginning.
They're not going
I
to
mean, clear,
throw it
like the
all.
second Iron Man movie wasn't very well received. They still made the Avengers, and the rest was history. So it's like they can keep going. Um, the Watcher saying, when I think of the Green Lanterns, I think of Kyle, Hal, and John, but especially John because after the already mentioned JLU series, exactly, Justice League Unlimited is very iconic for certainly like a lot of my generation, of my age and similar, where we grew up with that. So yeah, exactly. Everyone has their favorite lanterns. Cough Dexstar. Dexstar, yes. We also found earlier in one of the comments from the James Gunn thread, like the one fan of the lantern that nobody cares about. But anyway, I digress. Let's get into the comment from Miraculous, who's also in the chat. Miraculous9, Joker 2. This is from a show from I believe this is from last week, where we were talking about Joker Folie Deux's audience score when it first came out. And Miraculous had this to say, because I think we talked about the Lantern series as well, and he mentioned, because we were talking about basically James Hawes was being brought in to direct the first couple of episodes, and he's done a lot of good stuff before. So Miraculous said James Hawes is a great get for directing the Lanterns premiere. As far as the story goes, I'm still holding on to my theory that the murder in the Heartland will involve a cult that worships the center, which lines up with the ancient horror hinted at in the show's logline. Not sure about Guy being the victim though. Time will tell. In this case, when he says Guy, he's talking about Guy Gardner, who's being played by Nathan Fillion in the new Superman movie. He's another Green Lantern. So we could have as many as 3 Green Lanterns running around, unless Guy Gardner, is the one who gets knocked off, and then that's why John Stewart gets recruited as a new Lantern. So it's possible, but as far as the theory from Miraculous, I think that's interesting. The center.
Yeah.
That would be something that would be very much right up James Gunn's alley. And the ancient horror, it would certainly check that box. I mean, that's for sure.
Totally.
That logline is just full of intrigue, and I think that theory is also a really good one from Miraculous. I don't know what you guys think about it. We got JB in the chat. Oh no, JB, we did start early. Sorry, you're not confusing the time zone. We're doing an early show today because we have a couple of other things going on later in the day for all of us, and John wasn't feeling well, so for Bridget and me to kind of be able to line up our times, we went live a bit early. But yeah, Lenny, we started off like almost an hour ago, so you can always be kind of rewind. We'll be back tomorrow too. We've got lots more to talk about. That there's more news and more stuff to review. And you've got an hour's worth of show from today if you want to just hit that rewind button and start from the top. But essentially, the idea that it would be this ancient horror and it would be the center, that is really intriguing to me. I love it. I love it. Lenny suggesting maybe it's a Raven story. Maybe that's why we were getting Teen Titans film. I think it might be Trigon, the ancient horror for lanterns. That would be really cool if they tied it in, because the Teen Titans one is not a sure thing yet. Like, they're writing a script, but it's not greenlit, so we don't know if it's going to happen for sure. It could happen if Ana Nogueira turns in the script and James Gunn said, this is amazing, but if he, there's no guarantee that will happen. And then Miraculous adding on to his comment, the challenge will be getting chronically online fans to accept Superman doesn't have to make $1 billion to be considered a success. Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah,
I don't think it does. I mean, the Man of Steel didn't make $1 billion, and I thought it was financially successful. It made like over 600 million, which is a really good number. But Jay Kelly also liking the theory from Miraculous. I think that's a good. I did not think of it either, Jay. I mean, I don't think John thought of it either because I'm gonna run this by John and see what he says. Um, oh, now we're talking my kind of language. Okay, Mr. Miyagi's in the chat. Let James Gunn cook. Absolutely, absolutely. JB is still at work. Sorry, JB. We'll usually we are live later in the day. We will definitely try to get back to that. But today and tomorrow we have to do a bit earlier in the afternoon.
A little bit
So
earlier.
hang with us. And yeah, Mr. Miyagi has faith in James Gunn. I want to touch upon this quick question from Jay Kelly. I don't know if you're familiar with the character of Vandal Savage, Bridget, because Vandal Savage was a character that was brought into the CW, and he's sort of like this time hopping character who's from ancient Egypt, or at least a version that they had in the CW, and essentially he becomes a threat for the entire Justice League. I feel like if this is a Green Lantern show, that's going to sort of expand into the rest of the DC universe, because that's what James Gunn said, that we're gonna have a mystery here that's gonna hint at the larger big picture villain of the first chapter of this new DCU. It could be Vandal Savage. Like Vandal Savage could be like, the Thanos of this chapter one, where, we get hints of him in the background and he's pulling all the strings, and he's maybe the one who's be the leader of this cult, or who the cult worships in the beginning, and that's what leads to the murder and the ancient horror that the Lanterns are investigating. I think that's a really, really good point by Jay. I would love to see Vandal Savage. We haven't seen Vandal Savage in the movies yet, and I would love to see that. That would be so good. I really, really would love to see that.
Looked him up now, but he does look like a really cool character. I'm not gonna lie.
He does.
I think that would be really cool.
Yep. And the Watcher saying 700 million will be a success for Superman. That I think so. That would be a good number. I would love to see that. Creature Commandos will feature Dinosaur Island. Dino Island. Okay. Well, if it does, then that's going to be more power to the theory that Miraculous brought up. It's possible. I mean, we're going to be watching Creature Commandos, and it's coming out in less than 2 months' time, December 5th. Yeah. So we're going to start watching that, and if it shows up there, then maybe that's one more hint at what we're getting in the new Lantern show. And the Watcher saying that's a good start. 700 million for Superman. Iron Man made even less than that and kicked off the MCU. Exactly. Your first movie does not need to make $1 billion. It would be great if it did, but it could. And there's examples of like the first movie, Joker. The first one made $1 billion. The second one's not even going to make half of that. So there's no guarantee of success. You still get.
It's not about the money. It's about the story.
Exactly. Lenny agreeing. It doesn't have to make $1 billion, but it has to be a good production, a good story to be successful, and not universally panned by the public and critics. Exactly. Like what happened to Joker Folie do. We don't want that.
Right.
So
it's actually better when it's not, and then it just comes out in all its glory and it does its thing. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and Jay's like, hey, if you got that theory right, then holy cow, you have just got inside James Gunn's mind. And I agree with you, Jay. I think Miraculous is cooking, probably. Yeah. The question is, do we smell what the Miraculous is cooking? All right. Well, those were the comments from you guys. I think there's some fantastic theories there. A good assessment from Jay Kells about why the Green Lantern movie failed in 2011 and why John Stewart should be the lead Green Lantern in the new DCU. And of course, Miraculous with a theory that we might be getting that ancient horror in the Lantern show, and it could be the center, and it could tie into the Creature Commandos as well. I would love that. That would be the perfect tie-in, and it would just go to show again how the stories of this new DCU are connected in more ways than one, and more organically than even the MCU does in a lot of days. So I would love that. That would be fantastic. I mean, and again, it's been another fantastic show. Usually we go on for like 90 minutes, 3 hours, whatever, and we will do that. We will have John back on this Friday, and Liz is coming back, so we're going to be on in the evening on Thursday and Friday. On Friday, we have the Also Curious show, as well as DCU Daily. On Thursday, we just have DCU Daily. And then tomorrow, we're going to be on in the afternoon. We're going to be on a little bit earlier at, I believe, around 4 p.m. Eastern time, so 1 p.m. Pacific time. And then, we'll be back to our normal late night schedule on Thursday and Friday with John returning. John's taking a couple of days off to rest his voice. it's that time of year. People are, going down with
Yeah.
stuff, and I just wanted to give him a break, and he can use it. And I'm sure John misses you. I know you guys miss John, so we'll be sure to get him back on soon. But Bridget, thanks for so much for stopping
Yeah,
by.
of
It's been
course.
another fantastic show, and you guys have been amazing in the chat. We brought your comments in that we haven't done in a long
Yes.
time.
Thanks
We'll
for
bring
joining
more
us.
of those in. Thanks so much again, and we'll see you in the next episode of DCU Daily.